You've probably heard the hype. Copilot can talk to your internal systems. But is plugging your private data into Copilot a genius shortcut, or are you inviting a whole new set of headaches? Today, we're tackling the question you can't ignore. How do you actually wire up Copilot to your business data securely and without opening the door to every employee or bot in the company? We'll break down the real architecture, the must-know steps, and where security pitfalls love to hide. If you've been waiting for a practical roadmap, this is it. Why connecting Copilot to your data isn't as simple as it sounds. You walk into a meeting and hear the same pitch you keep seeing everywhere. With Copilot, you can ask for your sales pipeline, inventory levels, or HR stats and get an answer right away. No more dashboards, no outdated data. Sounds like the era of endless report requests and late-night Excel marathons is finally over, right? At least that's how the demo videos make it look. Imagine your warehouse manager asking, how many units of the new SKU are on hand? And Copilot just tells them instantly, even before they finish typing. Your finance lead wonders how bonuses will impact this quarter's forecast. And Copilot already has the answer. The business value is obvious, a tool that connects to live data, cuts through manual processes, and always returns something useful. If you're in ops, it's supposed to be a productivity boost you can feel. But here's the reality check. If it's that easy, why does integrating Copilot with business data feel like trying to knock down a brick wall using a rubber mallet? You try to set it up for one team and find yourself negotiating with 5 others before you even pick the database. Security wants assurances. Legal demands sign-offs. IT has a queue longer than the Starbucks drive-thru on Friday morning. And the real friction comes from where your data lives, scattered all over legacy systems, buried in peculiar formats and shielded by layers of access rules. Some of that is on purpose and for good reason. Let's take a step back and talk risk for a second, because this is where things tend to unravel. Most organizations still run plenty of systems that were good enough 5 years ago, but now act more like roadblocks. One team stores inventory in an old on-prem SQL database, while another stashes employee records somewhere nobody remembers to back up. The minute you float the idea of Copilot looking into those systems, you can see eyebrows raise. Security teams immediately start worrying, could this AI tool suddenly get a peek at payroll? Is a casual query about inventory going to return sensitive supplier terms? Or worse, the whole contract? That's not just paranoia. There's the actual risk of overconnecting. We all want shortcuts, but one company learned the hard way what that can mean in practice. About a year ago, a mid-sized distributor decided to accelerate their Copilot rollout. Pressed for time, they wired Copilot directly into a core database, hoping for an easy win on inventory access. What happened next? A spike in low priority data requests soon turned up audit logs full of unexpected calls, queries pulling down more data than expected, sometimes with personally identifiable information showing up in logs. Requests meant for sales numbers came back with tabular dumps containing account names and confidential supplier details. It wasn't a malicious attack. It was simply misapplied permissions and functions that never should have been exposed together. Overnight, their compliance team was knee-deep in incident reports and trying to explain to the board why something labeled a pilot nearly escalated into a privacy breach. That kind of misstep is easier than you would think. Most API endpoints aren't written with generative AI in mind, and relying on older interfaces is like giving the AI a skeleton key instead of a smart card. You might assume Copilot knows to avoid sensitive fields, but if you haven't set careful boundaries, it doesn't hesitate. That's why when you talk to IT leads about generative AI, half the conversation is warnings about what not to do. The advice you hear most isn't about what to connect, it's about how to say no to shortcuts. And the numbers back this up. According to Gartner, more than 60% of companies will have at least one AI-related data governance incident by 2025. That's nearly 2 out of every 3 organizations. These aren't just theoretical risks. These are real breaches, compliance headaches, and sometimes public trust issues. Maybe a user meant to pull inventory metrics, but the system lacked proper guardrails. Permissions get tangled, an overly broad API reveals more than it should, and suddenly audit logs are flagging every odd query. Most of these pain points don't come from Copilot having buggy code or poor intelligence. It's about architecture, or rather the lack of it. A shortcut that looks like a breeze at first can lead straight into trouble if you ignore basics like scoping, context, and auditability. It comes down to what sits between Copilot and your data. And if that middle layer isn't tight, you're never far from an escalation. So the takeaway is this. Connecting Copilot to your business data isn't about the technical magic at all. It's about doing the slow, careful work up front, building a safe path that sets clear boundaries and keeps the AI on a short leash. Without that, the shortcut can turn into a full-blown security nightmare fast. Now you're probably thinking, what does a safe, practical setup actually look like? The answer: it starts long before you let Copilot near your database. It starts with designing the right API. Building a bridge, designing APIs that Copilot can safely use. Let's get real about boundaries. You want Copilot to answer the classic what's on hand inventory question, but the idea of it reaching over and spilling payroll numbers or supplier contracts should make anyone pause. Drawing the right line isn't just good policy, it's your last defense against things veering off course. At the heart of that line is your API. Think of it as a club bouncer with a meticulous guest list, not a house key you copy and hand out to everyone with a Copilot query. If an API feeds Copilot too much, you've already lost control before it's even answered the first question. Now, here's where the uphill climb starts. The shortcut, just using your old, wide open internal API, feels incredibly tempting. It is juggling a dozen other fires. Project owners want to see value right now, and the pressure to show AI progress can be almost comical. But an API that was designed for a legacy dashboard or a back office app is usually a patchwork of endpoints nobody bothered to document fully. It probably returns everything except the office coffee fund. And if Copilot plugs into that mess, it will do exactly what it's told: gobble up data, run broad queries, and show responses with zero human awareness of your data's real-world boundaries. If you've ever asked yourself, what could possibly go wrong if we just reuse what we already have? You're not alone. One team at a large distribution company decided to do exactly that. They built a Copilot integration on top of an old inventory API. Inventory sounded safe, right? Until someone in procurement noticed that supplier contract terms, never relevant to a frontline question, started showing up in responses. Turns out that Endpoint returned every detail on each inventory item, including a link to the document store. It was fast, but nobody saw the oversharing until after the fact. A little convenience meant migrating their headaches from the data silo years straight into the AI age. So let's swap fantasies for the actual best practice. What we're aiming for is a purpose-built API, crafted specifically for what Copilot needs to answer and nothing else. Small, well-defined endpoints. Think, give me available inventory counts, broken down by warehouse. No detailed SKU information, no supplier IDs, no side channels leading to contract PDFs. Every piece of data in and out should be crystal clear. Simple parameters, validated input, and ideally, no wiggle room for an ambiguous request to turn into a phishing expedition. You want Copilot to get answers that are helpful, not answers that double as a compliance violation. This doesn't have to be a greenfield effort, but the difference is in the details. Define your API contracts the modern way, with open API or Swagger specs. When you document everything in an open API schema, you force yourself to outline exactly what endpoints exist, what they accept as input, what they return, and what errors can show up. If Copilot asks for a product's inventory, your endpoint should return just that. Account, maybe a timestamp, nothing sensitive. Error handling matters too. A robust error tells Copilot, you can't have that, rather than blasting it with a stack trace and an accidental data dump. And while we're at it, let's talk about permissions. Service accounts should be the only way Copilot ever hits your endpoint. No user-level credentials, no implicit escalation, and seriously, never let a plugin roam unchecked through your network. Use accounts scoped to exactly the permissions that the Copilot activity needs. Not sales master or all data read, but something like Copilot inventory query. That way, if Copilot asks for something outside of its remit, the request just hits a wall. Validation and throttling aren't optional either. Build output validation right into your API so a misfired Copilot request doesn't accidentally leak what a human wouldn't see. On the input side, check for bad requests early and reject them. Set up rate limits so that Copilot or a misconfigured bot can't spike your backend or degrade user experience for real humans who still need that system running smoothly. Ratcheting down the exposure isn't about being paranoid, it's just ensuring Copilot's usefulness doesn't become its own liability. Now, you don't have to reinvent the wheel or build every tool yourself. If you're in a Microsoft shop, check out Teams Toolkit for local debugging, or use Azure API management to set up your endpoints behind authentication quotas and log monitoring. Postman helps simulate Copilot calls and verify that your API returns only what you expect. No surprises, no loose endpoints left dangling for an eager AI to find. The upshot, when you take the time to design a Copilot-ready API, one that doesn't just work but works safely, you end up in control. Copilot can respond quickly and confidently, and the business gets value without unforced errors. That's how you make AI work in your favor, not against you. So APIs are covered, but now you're left with the million-dollar question: how does Copilot actually discover and use those endpoints, and how do you keep it boxed in? This is where manifest files and plugins come into play. Manifest files and plugin architecture, the secret handshake. If you've ever wondered how Copilot understands where to fetch that real-time inventory number or locks itself out of payroll data, it's not magic. It's a tiny text file that quietly runs the show, the manifest. Most people don't spend much time thinking about manifest files. They either skim a template or hit next during setup. But when it comes to connecting Copilot with your private APIs, that manifest file is as important as the API itself. Think of it as the bouncer and the velvet rope rolled into a single unassuming JSON or YAML. A manifest file spells out everything Copilot needs to know about your API, where to find it, what each endpoint does, how authentication works, and most importantly, what Copilot is allowed to ask for. It's the handshake, but also a checklist and a traffic cop, deciding what's in and what's out with none of the usual ambiguity you find in older integrations. With the right details in the manifest, Copilot can perform its job without ever seeing more than it should, even if the curiosity strikes. That's where things get risky, because the manifest isn't just a list to check off. One field with the wrong permission, a missing scope, or a loose authentication requirement, and suddenly Copilot has its nose in everything. The flip side, get it right and Copilot stays right where it belongs, confidently busy with inventory or HR data without wandering into sensitive territory. Let's look at a practical example. Say you're building an internal inventory plugin. Your manifest file might have a clear structure. It spells out the plugin name, Contoso Inventory Lookup. There's a description that tells users what Copilot can do with this API. Retrieve available product counts by warehouse. Then you hit the endpoints section. Each allowed endpoint gets an entry with its path, like API inventory summary. Allowed HTTP verbs just get, no post or put, a summary of what data comes back, and strict parameters. No endpoint for API payroll exists because the manifest functions as that boundary. If it's not in here, Copilot doesn't know it exists. You'll also define error codes so Copilot doesn't turn a back-end mishap into a customer-facing leak. Now for the permissions. Right in the manifest, you spell out which authentication protocols Copilot must use. OAuth 2 is the standard here because nobody wants to deal with hard-coded credentials. You might include explicit requirements like which scopes are accepted, inventory, read-only, for example. So even if Copilot tries a creative query, it's slammed shut before anything risky happens. If your backend uses certificates, that goes here too. No ambiguity, no guessing. Manifest scopes are your secret weapon for compliance. This is where you win or lose the governance battle. Instead of an all-access pass, each manifest defines exactly what Copilot is allowed to query. So if your API handles inventory pricing and procurement, but only inventory is cleared for Copilot, your manifest lists only those endpoints with inventory scope. Even internal documentation can sit behind the scope, so using Copilot for HR chatbots won't accidentally grab an org chart with compensation details. The boundary in the manifest is often the only thing standing between a smart query and a brand reputation problem. The plugin registration process with Microsoft is worth a pause here too. If you're working with Teams or Power Platform plugins, the manifest files get registered in the tenant with admin approval. These platforms add some extra safety nets like centralized consent and policy controls. If you're building for GPT-powered Copilot implementations, the manifest still performs the handshake, but the scope and endpoint documentation need to be bulletproof. You lose any room for let's figure it out later because Copilot will always take available doors at face value. Here's a real-world case. A finance department split their Copilot functionality into two distinct plugins, each with a unique manifest. The HR plugin included only endpoints for vacation accrual and PTO requests, while the inventory plugin had summary-only inventory counts. When someone in HR tried to ask Copilot for last month's top-selling items, the query went nowhere. Why? That path didn't exist in the HR manifest, and the inventory manifest was assigned to another group. The separation wasn't red tape. It meant auditors could see instantly what data was accessible without tracing through miles of API logs or permissions tables. For regulated industries, manifests can make or break an audit. In short, the manifest file isn't busy work or technicality. It's where you declare your intent, spell out boundaries, and protect what's sensitive. Every properly scoped permission, every declared endpoint, every authentication method all ensures Copilot is useful without ever risking your business critical data. You get a plugin that adds value, not stress. But what if you handle health records, payment info, or anything else that triggers compliance alarms? Building a strong manifest is just the starting point. Security, performance, and regulations have a whole new set of demands once Copilot goes live. Security, compliance, and performance, avoiding the hidden traps. If you've ever thought the real challenge was just getting your Copilot plugin off the ground, wait until it actually hits production. Building the integration is one thing, but the hard part starts as soon as real business data and real users are in the loop. Suddenly, three pillars become non-negotiable: security, compliance, and performance. Any weak point here and the whole shiny new plugin risks turning from asset to embarrassment before you've even had a chance to show it off. You might have followed every best practice while developing, but the minute it goes live, every little flaw turns into a big deal. Let's say you're the owner for a plugin that finally bridges Copilot to loads of internal data. At first, everyone is impressed, but then the pingbacks start creeping in. Finance sees weird performance stalls, service desk gets tickets about missing data, and worst of all, an auditor flags an unauthorized access in your log files. That's a real scenario from a client we worked with. Turns out the rush to production skipped a step. Least privilege was mostly honored, except for one path that allowed cross-department data views. Not only did their SOC have to walk back what Copilot had seen, but the finance app started to lag too. The plugin wasn't just misbehaving, it was hurting the rest of the workload. This is why security isn't just about a checklist item, it's the baseline. You start with managed identities, and you never hand a Copilot plugin more access than it absolutely needs. Managed identities mean your API trusts only what it's told to trust. No secrets, keys, or password guesses floating around. Every call Copilot makes gets tagged, and you log every response. You want those logs centralized, not sitting forgotten on a lonely VM where nobody looks until something's on fire. The principle of least privilege always applies. If Copilot's supposed to see inventory counts, then inventory counts are the only path open. Not even a whiff of payroll, contracts, or HR records. Audit trails aren't just for the annual compliance exercise. Smart teams set up real-time log monitoring, so anything suspicious is flagged before next week's report. And if you think nobody will notice a weird request, ask any IT manager who's had to explain random spikes to compliance. Every odd query stands out, especially when it comes from the bot that just rolled out last month. It helps to automate alerts for unusual patterns like a spike in failed API calls or sudden surges in requests outside business hours. The compliance bit is where things get even trickier. In many organizations, the rulebook isn't just a nice to have. If your data touches Europe at all, you're facing GDPR and all the restrictions that come with it. Healthcare, you get HIPAA. Finance, say hello to SOX and PCI DSS. Manifest scopes are your first solid wall. By limiting exactly what Copilot can see, you restrict exposure and support compliance by design. But that's not the end. Data masking in the API layer turns things like employee numbers or customer names into the kind of sanitized values that won't raise eyebrows during an audit. Every call, every bit of data should have a clear metadata trail. Was it masked? Who accessed it? And was the access needed for business? If you can't answer that instantly, you're not ready for a real audit. Testing plugins safely means creating a full shadow environment before production. You don't launch straight into the wild. Good teams build sandbox data realistic enough for Copilot to use, but stripped of anything sensitive. They spin up staged environments where logs, permissions, and response times get hammered well before a single production request shows up. Even when you think things are airtight, log monitoring is ongoing. The minute you see something odd, you can pause, trace it, and fix the root. Scaling up brings a whole new layer of headaches. One team might build a plugin for inventory, but soon HR, finance, and operations all line up wanting in. You never want a single plugin to become a catch-all. Best practice is to segment plugins by business area, one for HR, another for inventory, a third for sales. Every plugin gets distinct endpoints with access limited per department. Think of it not as extra work, but the only way to keep unwanted data from crossing the line. Usage spikes are another hidden trap. Suppose during month end everybody queries Copilot for metrics. If you haven't set usage caps and endpoint restrictions, your backend could drown in requests, leaving both AI and humans frustrated. Performance isn't just a bonus, it's part of the contract. If Copilot's answers lag behind, users stop trusting it and revert to manual calls or Excel exports. You don't want to be the reason the AI hype fizzles. Use cache strategies to store frequently accessed data, keep API queries fast by indexing what matters, and have real telemetry piping straight to your dashboard. Measure time to response for every call Copilot makes. You want fast, predictable answers, not waiting for AI screens. When you build around these three pillars, security, compliance, and performance, you get a Copilot plugin that doesn't just work, it actually supports the business. Risk goes down, value goes up, and those late night fire drills start to disappear. People can rely on the AI, not cross their fingers every time they ask for an answer. So, does wiring up Copilot to company data give you the edge or just more headaches? Let's see where the big picture lands. If you treat Copilot plugins as just another integration project, you're missing what's actually at stake. They're now a frontline defense and productivity tool rolled into one. Every connection point you build is another decision about risk, scale, and how much you trust your guardrails. Before you connect Copilot to business data, ask yourself, are you ready for the scrutiny that comes with it or just hoping to get lucky? Copilot's strength depends on the groundwork you lay. If you want Copilot to be an advantage, subscribe for more guides that help you stay ahead while keeping risks out of your business.